Yesterday we did a bunch of operations with imaginary numbers. We learned how to do addition and subtraction and multiplication. And today we are going to simplify with division. Okay, so when you have division, okay, you're going to have some type of imaginary number in the denominator. Okay, so for this one, we have negative 2 over 5 minus 8i. And when we simplify these, we are going to multiply by something called the conjugate. So we're going to multiply by the conjugate of the denominator. So when you are multiplying by the conjugate of the denominator, what you're doing is you are trying to get rid of the I, because remember the I is the square root of negative 1. So we want to multiply by something that's going to get that I out of the denominator. So yesterday, when we did multiplication, when we have something like this, do you see how we still had a statement with I in it? But with 2 plus 9i and 2 minus 9i, we were able to get a number without I. So these two are conjugates. You have 2 plus 9i, 2 minus 9i is the conjugate. So do you guys think you could tell me what the conjugate is of 5 minus 8i? Yep, it's just going to be 5 plus 8i. Great. Okay, so that's what we're going to multiply by. Okay, so 5 plus 8i, and remember, when you are multiplying an expression, you have to multiply the numerator and the denominator because we don't have an equation. So equations, one side, what you do to one side, you do to the other side. Expression, you have to multiply by something equivalent to 1 because anything times 1 is itself. So just like we did yesterday, we are going to FOIL. And if you like putting these in parentheses because that helps you FOIL, that's great. 5 times 5 is going to be 25. And then if you chose the right conjugate, the outside term and the inside term should cancel out to make 0. And then negative 8 times 8 is negative 64. I times I is going to be I squared. Okay, and if you want, you can keep simplifying the bottom first. Anytime you have I squared, you're going to plug in that negative 1. So this becomes 25 plus 64. Okay, which is going to be 89 in the denominator. And then on the top here, because we only have one term, we're going to distribute. Okay, so I want you to multiply those together, distribute, write that on top. All right, so then we should get negative 10 minus 16i on the top. Okay, negative 10 minus 16i when we distribute. Now, just like we did yesterday, you always want these in the form a plus bi. Okay, that's going to be your final form. Okay, so when you have this negative 10 minus 16i, you are just going to divide each of these by 89. And if you have a common factor, you'll reduce Okay, for this one, we do not need to reduce. Okay, but anytime you have an imaginary term, you want the real number first and then the imaginary term. Okay, so that is your A plus BI form. You have the real number and then add it or subtract it if it's negative. All right, so for part B, this is going to start the same. So I want you to see if you can pick what you're going to multiply by. What's the conjugate going to be? Okay, and then let's multiply that by the top and the bottom. Okay, so the only sign that changes is going to be the one in the middle. Okay, so just like here it was 5 and we multiplied by 5, if this is a negative 4, we're still going to start with a negative 4, but then it will be minus 3i. Minus 3i. Okay, so then we're going to FOIL, we're going to distribute. I want you to take a minute to do that. Okay, I do want you to give this a try. Hopefully this will make a mistake. On the right hand pencil, if you should erase that. Or even if you want to try that on another piece of paper. And then anytime you have an I squared, you are going to do that substitution. So once you've multiplied, you guys can plug in I squared where you need. Okay, so a negative times a negative is a positive, so we get 16. Okay, here you have negative 12i, here you have positive 12i. Okay, so that does cancel. A negative times a positive is a negative. Okay, and then we are going to plug that in. Okay, so you're going to get good at knowing this is 16 plus your value. Okay, 25 in the denominator. And then on the top, a negative times a positive should be negative 8i. 2i times negative 3i is negative 6i squared. And then we're plugging in that negative. Okay, so the negative times a negative is a positive 6. I'm going to write it as 6 minus 8i here, just so I have that I term second, so it's in this form. You could also do that in the last step. That's okay. Just remember your negative times your negative here is going to turn into a positive. Okay, and then if this is negative, you can make this a minus. Okay, and again, 6 and 25, 8 and 25, there are no common factors. So I'm looking to see if I can reduce, and if they don't have any common factors, I'm just going to leave it. All right, now for C, there's more than one way to do this correctly. So you always want to multiply by the conjugate of the denominator. Okay, so the denominator is 5i. Okay, what most people are going to do is multiply the top and the bottom by negative 5i. Okay, so when you do that, you have negative 25I squared in the denominator, okay, which we know here is going to be negative 1, and then a negative times a negative is a positive. And then when you're distributing, this time you're distributing to these two terms. 3 times negative 5 is negative 15. A negative times a positive, this would be negative 50I squared. We want to plug in that negative 1. A negative times a negative is a positive. Okay, and this time, do have some simplifications that you can do here. Okay, so make sure you always want to reduce. Okay, it should always be in simplest form. Okay, so go ahead and reduce those. Okay, so 50 divided by 25 is actually a whole number, so we're going to write it as a whole number. It is 2. And then what goes into both 15 and 25? 5. So if you divide them each by 5, it'll be 3/5 I. Okay, were any of you thinking of something else you could multiply by? Negative 1, 1. You have to have your what with it? You have to have I with it. So if you want, the only thing we're trying to do is get rid of the i's. So in order to do that, you only need I squared. So if you multiply this by I over I, or negative I over negative I, okay, let's look and see what happens here. So this would give me 5I squared on the bottom, which would be negative 5. And then on the top, you would have 3I plus 10I squared. So that would be negative 10 plus 3I. Again, you would just have to reduce. Okay, this is, I'm going to put 3 over negative 5, and then I'm going to rewrite it. Okay, so negative divided by a negative is a positive, and if this is negative, just make this a minus here, and you get the same thing. Okay, so that's another option if it's, this is called a monomial because it's one term. These are called binomials because they are two terms.